By.
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. Let's see if you can start sharing your screen. Excellent. It's
All
coming
right.
through loud and clear.
Awesome. And you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Thank you everyone for being here today. And I am super excited to share a project I did this past fall where I looked at how urbanization is affecting the web aggregation of funnel web spiders. So first, I want to take you on a little trip to Lincoln, Nebraska. And here's a shot of the city campus for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And you can see this habitat is characterized by lots and lots of pavement, especially in the form of roads and sidewalks. There's some tall buildings and some grass patches that are separated by the pavement, and also a few people walking around. And when I first arrived here for grad school, one of my first goals was to find a park nearby that I could kind of escape from the city and take some nice walks. And luckily, I found a place called Wilderness Park that's just 7 kilometers south of city campus. And here is what Wilderness Park looks like. There's some dense deciduous tree growth, uh, a lot of diversity in the undergrowth, and there's tons of trails that wind throughout the park that people use for walking and biking and horseback riding. And if we compare these two locations, they differ in a ton of different ways. For example, city campus has less tree cover and much more impervious cover or pavement. It's patchy, like I described with the grass patches. There's differences in the biodiversity of both plants and animals. There's surely differences in climatic conditions, especially that of the urban heat island effect, where cities on average are warmer than the surrounding areas. And then there's huge differences in the human disturbance. There's quite a few people that use the trails of Wilderness Park, but city campus has about 25,000 students that are on campus during the school year. So a lot more human presence in the city. There's also differences in the air, water, and noise pollution, and surely pesticide use. But despite all of these differences, there is one thing that I started to notice that both of these locations have, and that's funnel web spiders. They are appropriately named because their webs are shaped like funnels. They consist of a sheet that leads into a retreat, and that's generally where the spider sits and waits for prey to land on the web. And you can tell from these pictures that they build their webs on a variety of different substrates. In the left here, in the grass, they'll build webs in grass, which is where they get one of their common names, the grass spider. They'll also build webs up in plants and on a whole bunch of different human-made surfaces. In fact, they even build them in a lovely birdhouse. And there's been a lot of research done on a closely related species. So this is Agelenopsis pennsylvanica. And there's a lot of research done on Agelenopsis aperta. And they found that aperta actively chooses their web location based on the quality of the habitat. And they found that there's all kinds of different factors that go into habitat quality, especially that of prey abundance, the availability of substrates to build webs on. Related to that is the structure of the vegetation, and also the microclimate conditions, especially temperature. And since they're actively choosing these web locations based on the quality of the habitat, this habitat quality is sure to differ between these locations, even though they're both building in these locations. And as I was walking around these two sites, I noticed that there's some differences in how they're spatially distributing their webs. So this got me wondering if urbanization affects the spatial distribution and the web placement of funnel web spiders. So to understand this question, I set these two locations as my study sites. City campus is figure B here in the middle. And what we did was we labeled each intersection of a path, whether that be a road or a sidewalk, with a number, and we randomly selected 12 sites from those labeled intersections in order to take measurements at. Similarly, on Wilderness Park, there's a lot of places where the trails intersect. So we numbered all of those trail intersections and randomly chose from 10 of those to use as study sites. Starting at the intersection of the path, we walked a random direction along a path all the time searching for funnel webs. And we would stop at each funnel web we found and determined whether or not a spider was present. And in order to do that, we used a vibrating toothbrush with a toothpick duct tape on the end because the spiders are very responsive to this prey stimulus. So here's an example of how that would work. So we passed by all of the webs that seemed to not have a spider present until we reached the first web that had a spider present. And we called this web the focal web. And around the focal web, we measured a 10-meter radius. And within that 10-meter radius, we counted all of the webs, both vacant and occupied, that were within that 10-meter radius. We also measured the distance from the retreat of the focal web to the retreats of all of the neighboring webs. However, for this study, I have to limit my analysis to only the 2 closest webs because on average, there was only about 3 webs in a single site in Wilderness Park. So in order to compare the 2 locations, I had to limit to just the 2 closest. In terms of web placement, we measured how high the spiders placed the web and also measured the maximum height of the substrate. And we did the maximum height of the substrate because in the city, it's likely that plants are trimmed and more maintained. And so I wanted to control for the fact that plants might just be in general shorter on city campus. We also recorded all of the available plant species that were within the 10-meter radius, as well as the plant species that the spiders were actually building their webs on. So all of my graphs are going to look pretty similar, so I just want to introduce you to how they're going to look. In all of them, the x-axis is the same, so UNL City Campus is on the left and Wilderness Park on the right, and then my y-axes will change. So here I'm showing the distance that we walked from the path intersection to the focal web on the left, and then the number of webs that were within the 10-meter radius on the right. And just another point I want to make is that these are box plots, but I've also graphed the mean and standard error with the black dot and error bars. And so there was no difference in the distance that we walked from the path intersection to the focal web. However, once we reached the focal web, there were significantly more webs within a 10-meter radius on city campus than in Wilderness Park. So this was our first hint that spiders might be aggregating more on campus, since we didn't walk any different distance, but found a lot more webs on city campus. And to get at this some more, we looked at the distance from the retreat of the focal web to the retreats of the 2 closest neighbors. So you'll see the closest neighbor on the left and the second closest neighbor on the right. And in both cases, the neighbors were significantly closer to the focal web on city campus than they were in Wilderness Park, which means they're closer in proximity in that space. So this was kind of our second hint that the spiders might be aggregating more on city campus than in Wilderness Park. And to show a visual representation of this, we had marked each of the webs with an orange flag at each of the sites, but to make them easier to see here, I've circled them. And you'll see a photo of a site on city campus on the left and a site for a photo from Wilderness Park on the right. And you can see City Park has a ton of spiders and they're basically building webs right on top of each other. And if we look at Wilderness Park, there's only 3 webs at this site and they're spaced very far apart. So if we look at web placement, just to remind you again, we measured the height of the web and corrected that for the total height of the web substrate. And we found that webs were significantly lower on their substrates on city campus than they were in Wilderness Park. And then I also mentioned that we recorded the number of plant species that were available and the number of plant species that the spiders used. And so we divided the number of plant species used by the number of plant species that were available, or vice versa. We divided the number of species available by the species used. And we found that spiders on city campus used proportionally more of the plant species that were available to them on city campus than they did in Wilderness Park. So just to wrap up our findings, we looked at both the spatial distribution and the web placement of Agelenopsis pennsylvanica. And although there was no difference in the distance that we walked to reach the focal web, there were significantly more webs at each site on city campus than in Wilderness Park, and the neighboring webs were far closer together. So this might suggest that the spiders are aggregating on city campus. And then when we looked at the web placement, webs were proportionally lower on their substrates on city campus, and they used proportionally more of the plant species that were available to them. So the purpose of our study was mostly just to quantify that spiders are differing in both their spatial distribution and web placement. So our next steps are to figure out exactly why they're doing this and what factors are affecting the habitat quality if they are selecting where they're putting their webs. So opened a lot more questions than we probably answered, but makes for really interesting future directions. And with that, I just want to give a huge thank you to all of the members of the Habits Lab that helped me with every step of the way of this project, especially Madison and Earl, who are photographed at the right there, for helping me collect a lot of the data. My committee members for helping with the conceptualization of this project, other members of UNL, such as Behavior Group and the School of Biological Sciences staff, and Kemp for also helping me collect some of the data. And a huge thank you to my funding sources. And with that, I'll take any questions that you have. Thank you.
All right, so there are quite a few questions. Some spiders don't respond to the sonic stimulation, and perhaps because they're well fed. Did you mark and retest any webs multiple times to confirm if there was no one at home?
Yeah, I really wish I had done that. We did this right at the end of the spider season. So it would have been really cool to go back and see if these spiders were home and just didn't respond to the vibrating toothbrush, because sometimes they don't respond. But we did not for this study.
All right, and another one is there's a light pole evident in the city campus shot. Would not the light increase the available prey?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and one that I'm also curious about, because I don't think it's been looked at for funnel web spiders specifically, but I know there's studies out there that show that spiders respond to lights in the city because of the increase in available prey. So I didn't record that for this study, but definitely something I'd be interesting to see if that's what's causing these differences between the sites.
And I don't think you did, but you've been asked, did you look at any predation effects?
I didn't. These are all really good questions.
Practice for your defense, right? So
yeah, so these, there did seem to be quite a few more vacant webs on campus than there was in Wilderness Park. And I think that could be a number of different things, whether that be predation or human presence, their disturbance. I mean, students are walking all over the place, so they could, scare a spider out of its web or something. There's people who maintain all the bushes and everything on campus, so that could scare them out of their webs. But predation would have been a really interesting thing to look at.
And likewise, I don't think you looked at competition in the natural versus university sites.
Yeah, I didn't. And I think a lot of the the Reichert papers that I had cited um, suggest that these spiders at certain life stages might be territorial and compete with other spiders for spots. But I didn't specifically look at that in this study.
All right. That inspired quite a few questions, and I think we'll miss the last one. But thank you so much, and that was a great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.